The city had a pulse that ran on fiber and rumor, a heartbeat measured in pings and panic. Someone had given the pulse a hand, an invisible manipulator whose work showed up like a smear on the news cycle. A respected teacher arrested for arson after a video of them throwing a Molotov at a storefront surfaced. A volunteer cashier who walked into a bank and emptied a drawer because a voice on their phone told them their child would be harmed otherwise. An elderly man who confessed live on a hacked stream to crimes he had never imagined committing. They called the orchestrator the Puppeteer in the shadow chats because the methods felt theatrical. Strings of fabricated proof, perfectly matched threats, personal details no one should have had. For a long time, the Puppeteer had been a rumor wrapped in code, a ghost pleasing to conspiracy forums. Then Mara Lynn's name appeared in an innocuous notification, an anonymous message, every line calibrated to make her stomach drop. The message included a time-stamped clip of her leaving a cafe 3 nights earlier, her face obscured but unmistakably hers, and beneath it, in plain text, "Open the door at midnight, or they see the footage." Mara had lived inside networks, had dismantled malware as a contractor for 5 different nonprofits. The rational part of her brain cataloged options: block, trace, turn it over to law enforcement. But a sliver of something older, the one that had once learned to hide from larger predators, told her to listen. If they can make me move, maybe I can make them move first, she thought. It felt like a dare. Mostly, it felt like a trap. The Puppeteer's artistry was in the small, intimate violences. Not just fake footage, but trusted voices on the line, doctored messages from colleagues, forged legal threats that quoted exact details of past misdemeanors. People didn't always commit crimes because they were cruel. Often they did it because someone had found the ache they spared no one to conceal. Victims arrived in courtrooms and emergency rooms with their hands full of evidence they were convinced would prove their innocence. Precise screenshots, timestamps, receipts, all placed there by the same invisible fingers that had set the initial shove. The press loved the drama. The forum trolls loved the puzzle, and the Puppeteer loved the geometry of it. Everyone moved where they were pushed. Mara read the feeds with a clinical horror. Each case had the same cadence. She remembered sharply the phone call that accompanied the clip of her. A voice speaking in the odd, soft arithmetic of coaxing threat. "You know what happens if you don't, Mara," the voice said. And in the background, a child's laugh. Not hers, but filmed in a home she recognized from a charity gala 2 years ago. Mara felt for a moment like a marionette who had been handed her own strings to test. "You picked the wrong target," she told the empty room later that night, and the words tasted like defiance and confession mixed together. She could have run to the police then. She did not. Instead, she watched. Mara could have been a cliché, a burned-out analyst who traded curiosity for caution. But curiosity had been how she survived a hacking crew 5 years earlier. It had kept her from being swallowed by a job that loved quick wins and shame. She set up false accounts, not to provide a manual for anyone but to buy herself time. An apparently compliant inbox that would feed the Puppeteer's hunger while she sketched the hand behind the hunger. Patterns emerged like a fingerprint. The Puppeteer loved irony. Satirical gifs slipped into an email seconds before a deadline. References to small local jokes that no one outside a community would know. A preference for low-bandwidth tricks that unrolled into maximum emotional damage. Mara noticed a cadence to the timestamps, a favorite server region for routing messages that was never the same twice, but always in a narrow corridor. She thought in the first person sometimes, unabashedly. If I can map where the puppet moves, I can corner the puppeteer. Her friend Tom, an old colleague who had once taught her to parse packet noise like the weather, watched her work late one night and said, "You're not doing the safe thing." Mara smiled without humor. "Safe never finds who pulls the strings," she replied. The sentence was part boast, part warning, and it underscored everything she was risking. Reputation, liberty, the thin safety of ordinary life. The puppeteer grew bored with tests and escalated. A favored target was always a chess piece sacrificed to see who would notice, and Mara learned that escalation wasn't just cruelty, it was a probe. The next message arrived with a video of her mother's voice, recorded in a living room the cameras might have seen from a charity event, with a caption telling Mara where to be and when. The puppeteer's threats stopped being abstract and became intimate. "Bring the package to the pier at 2 a.m., or watch this air across every channel your mother belongs to," the text read. Panic is an arithmetic the human body learns quickly. Mara's hands shook enough that she had to set the phone down before she could reply. Later, while she rode the subway, she rehearsed. "I will not let them make me the story." But rehearsal is not strategy. She called Tom and then the one lawyer who still owed her favors from a pro bono consultation. They argued in quick bursts across encrypted lines about whether to involve the police or stage compliance to collect more evidence. "We can risk everything to catch a ghost," Tom said. "Or we can save your mother now." Mara's inner voice felt like a live wire. "I am not choosing between my mother's face and an unknown criminal's head on a platter." She chose a third way, apparent compliance that masked careful observation. She would go to the pier with a sealed envelope and a recorder, but she would not hand over the envelope empty-handed. She would make the exchange, and while the puppeteer took credit, she would take data. At the pier, the city smelled of rain and oil, and the clock's hands moved with private indifference. The puppeteer's operatives, the people who did the hands-on work, were always human and always fallible. A thin man in a hood waited beneath a sodium lamp, the kind of cliché Mara would have mocked in her training modules. She approached with the envelope under her coat, the camera tucked in a small, nondescript device. The lawyer 2 blocks away with the police on a call in the background, prepared to say they'd been compromised if anything went wrong. The exchange should have been a simple, terrifying choreography. Envelope for silence. Instead, the man handed her a small flash drive in return, his eyes avoiding her face. "This will keep them quiet," he said, in a voice that knew too much and wanted to be heard. Mara felt the world compress to the weight of plastic in her palm. When she plugged the drive into a burner laptop back at Tom's apartment, what played was a library of curated lives, dossiers of victims, blackmail materials, and a list of names that read like a phone book for the vulnerable. At the top of the list was a name she recognized and didn't want to. Eleanor Chase, director of a private risk firm that advised politicians, corporations, and a mysterious set of non-profit boards. Mara's first thought was simple and practical. If Eleanor runs the operation, there is a structure, not a specter. Tom's mouth found a hard line. Eleanor Chase could bury us, he said. But if this ties her... Mara thought she had engineered a trap. She had assumptions. That Eleanor wanted scalable control. That she recruited foot soldiers with promises and trained them in deniability. And those assumptions were why the confrontation that followed felt both inevitable and cinematic. Mara sent a message, carefully crafted, that would force Eleanor's hand. A faux leak implying Mara had traced funds and would go public unless the puppeteer confessed. It was a bluff of brittle wire, but it got a response. Eleanor requested a meeting in a glassed atrium at dawn, the kind of place designed to make power feel both godlike and accountable. Mara went alone. She wanted to watch the face that had once advised global executives on crisis management contort into something less, the manager of a moral calculus she couldn't follow. Eleanor arrived with a briefcase and an entourage that looked like it had been paid in hush money and hazard pay. She smiled with the practiced flatness of a woman used to having contingency plans. "You don't know what game you're in," Eleanor said, voice cooled by veneer. Mara said nothing at first. She watched the way Eleanor's eyes flicked to a small earpiece, someone in the room feeding instructions, and Mara's pulse threaded into a tighter rhythm. "You thought you were pulling strings," Eleanor said, then leaned forward until the glass light cut shards into her cheekbones. "You are in my theater." Mara felt fury, hot and immediate. "People are not props," she replied, the first person cutting through the air like a small, sharp blade. "You can't give them scripts and call it justice." The scene might have ended there in cages of lawyers and insurers, but the theater had an audience that included hackers who watched public feeds and activists who tracked money flows. The moment Eleanor reached for a phone to call security, a dozen feeds across the city lit up with the files from the flash drive, released anonymously into the torrent. Panic unfolded like a rash under skin. Eleanor's cohorts did not move in one voice but in a rash of reflexes. Some fled, some tried to deny. One collapsed into a messy admission. A human enterprise scaled by secrecy unspooled when its secrecy was stripped. The arrest was messy and imperfect, not the clean justice Mara had once wished for as a child who believed in narratives. Eleanor attempted to spin everything as investigative consulting gone rogue, as necessary for stability, as cruelly necessary. The court of public opinion is a different beast. It can be sloppier than the law and crueler than a judge. Still, the structure that had enabled the puppeteer's operations, the infrastructure of blackmail and manipulation and plausible deniability, took blows that would make replication harder. Victims began to recover agency in the ways people do when they realize they were not uniquely evil but instrumentally broken. Mara watched the news cycles with something like distance, and when reporters asked her how it felt to have beaten a ghost, she sometimes told them, "I didn't beat a ghost. I beat a system someone built to pretend ghosts were choice." There were quiet, private victories. Phone calls returned, some apologies given, some friendships rebuilt. There was also a small and persistent ache, the knowledge that the puppeteer's game had been too simple to die because people who profited from secrecy would always be tempted to play it. We stopped one puppeteer, Mara thought. But there will always be hands that want to make people dance. On a rooftop that faced the river, where the city spread like circuitry under the night, Mara let the popcorn of lights make soft constellations. She had kept a pawn from the pier exchange, a plastic talisman of the moment she chose to move rather than be moved. She turned it in her hand and thought about the thin architecture that had allowed a single person to marionette lives. Anonymity, plausible forgery, fear. She had promised herself she would build something in the cracks, a public resource, an educational push, a network of people willing to testify. It was small work compared to the ruin she had seen, but it was work that moved against the grain of secrecy. Below, the city hummed with 1,000,000 potential puppets and 1,000,000 potential resistances. Mara remembered the little voice that had said she had chosen the wrong target. She had, in a way. She had chosen herself. "I won't be the puppet," she said aloud to the wind, and the sound tasted like oath and consequence intertwined. It would not be enough to end the puppeteer's game entirely. Systems make mirrors of each other, and hands find new ways to grasp. But for now, the strings were visible, and a few people who had been puppets were learning how to cut them. That, for Mara, was enough to begin.